Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the third episode of World Cup Group Talk, where today we're going to be focused on Group C. In the series, I will be joined by a special guest, which will focus on a specific nation out of the nations in the group. And today I'm joined by Alex Bishop to talk about all things Japan and the World Cup. Alex is a very knowledgeable journalist based in Japan, covering all things women's Japanese football, specifically the WE League, which is the Japanese Professional Women's Football League. Not only will Alex join me to talk about Japan and the expectations going into the World Cup, but we'll also be touching on the trajectory of football or women's football in Japan over the last decade. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm very excited to be joined with none other than Alex Bishop to talk about all things Japan and the World Cup. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller. Great to be here. Yeah, looking forward to getting into what I think will be one of the more intriguing groups in this
Yeah,
tournament.
definitely a group that people are maybe slightly sleeping on. It could be anybody's ball game to top it and go through. But let's talk about Japan. Obviously, previous World Cup winners, so I'm sure they're going in with a chip on their shoulder for this one. They've already announced their 23-player squad. There's some your big names of the Yui Hasegawas, the Endo, the your Sugita, but in a general sense, it's a very versatile squad, especially in that front line. But you do have that big cloud of Mana Iwabuchi missing. Obviously, she has not had the best season in England. Few youngsters have been able to steal that spot that she maybe fell out of. What do you think that selection process looked like, and how do you assess a player like Iwabuchi who had won the World Cup with them not being included this time?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that is the one choice that's kind of grabbed the headlines of this 23 player squad. Well, first of all, if we had the prime Iwabuchi in form,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this is even a conversation. She gets in the squad and she starts at least all the big games, aside from rotation. But the truth is, and what I've seen, most people, most fans of Mana Iwabuchi, not just in Japan but overseas, that they seem to have the main kind of factor right, in that the form has not been there at league level. The fitness, obviously, she's had a few injuries. There was the operation that she had to have last summer that kept her out of the East Asian Championships. This was an ankle operation, I believe, kind of kept her out of the running, out of playing for Arsenal, and again at international level as well. It's not as much of a surprise as some might think. There were a couple of friendlies. I think it was back in September where Ikeda, he did not put her in. He didn't include her in that. I think she was actually fit enough to have been chosen. She was actually sitting on Arsenal's bench at the time. So I think the logic behind that decision was kind of to, kind of like teach her a lesson kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
to say, look, you're going to have to get some game time. We've got a lot of talent here in Japan, and which there is, even in this World Cup squad now. There is a lot of other talent that have actually missed out. It was kind of, to say to her, look, get yourself playing, whether that's at Arsenal or to move on, and then you can get yourself back in contention. Which, to be fair, she did got to move to Tottenham, which when you're an Arsenal player, that's not exactly the most ideal choice, but that kind of shows the
Yeah.
intent was there, yeah, to get herself back on track. Yeah, and then sadly, I mean, I don't watch the WSL too closely, but I did notice that she was playing with a leg taped up, so there's obviously some kind of injury fitness concerns, and maybe the performance wasn't quite there as well. And really, when you think about it, if you put yourself in the coach's position, she hasn't really performed for Ikeda at the few tournaments that she has played for him. One of which was the Asian Cup
Yeah.
at the beginning of 2022, which she was,
Mm-hmm.
to be fair, COVID for the group stage, so
Yeah.
not much help there. And then in the friendlies as well, she struggled to be impactful. And Ikeda seems to be more of a team rather than just have the one, a kind of like a focal point target
Mm-hmm.
like Iwabuchi. So I think ultimately that is probably the main reason why he's decided not to include it this time. The If I can just kind of turn this back around on the angle I'm coming from here, there might be something else other than kind of match sharpness and match fitness issues. There are two players included in the 23 player squad who have recently come back from long-term ACL injury. These are WE
Mm-hmm.
League placed players,
Yep.
one of which is Remina Chiba at Jeff Chiba United, and the other is Hana Takahashi at the current WE League champions, Urawa Reds ladies.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Remina Chiba, she's played, I think, about 3 or 4. She came back about a month ago, played about 3 or 4 games, scored some goals, back to form, so that makes sense. Hana Takahashi, centre back, very good player, very strong, but she's only played a mere 20 minutes for Urawa Reds. And that was in the final game of the season when the league was already wrapped up. Just 20 minutes at the end, and she's made the selection. So this idea that Ikeda has kind of like a hard line on sharpness, match fitness, and injury proneness,
Mm-hmm.
that might not be quite right either. So I'm thinking that there may also be some kind of squad succession planning going on here. Maybe in future tournaments, he's kind of looking now. We have it's a very youthful squad, right? This Japan,
Mm-hmm.
one of the youngest in the tournament. So he's probably looking ahead to perhaps the Olympics or the Asian Cup when that comes around, or even the next World Cup. And the young attackers, of which there are many, there's no doubt
Mm-hmm.
about that.
Yeah.
We could have the next Mane Iwabuchi coming up very soon. I'm sure we'll get into who is the young
Yeah.
stars and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, a little bit of that also is playing into it. So in the end, it's a very tough and unfortunate situation for the player. I'm sure she will bounce back. There'll be no shortage of suitors for her next club.
Mm.
That's probably the reasons behind it.
Yeah. You brought up youthful players. I think Japan being one of the youngest ones is actually an advantage that maybe slightly is being overlooked. We love to talk about experience, but sometimes you want those like young stars to bring something different to the game. One of which I think is Hamano going into her first World Cup. She has been absolutely sensational at Hamburg in Sweden. I mean, what do you envision her role to be? Do you think she would slip in as a potential starter? I don't think we've seen much of that yet. And she hasn't really had. I can't recall exactly how many camps she's been called up for the senior squad, but certainly not many to be slipping straight into the starting 11. But given her form and the impact that she's had in Sweden, what do you think? How much of a role really is she going to have this World Cup?
Sure. Okay. So what we've seen so far from the preparation so far, and what some of the local analysts are saying, and some of the local outlets, and this is kind of during her time at Hammarby as well, while she's been informed there. She is the second choice number 9. So Japan play with a front three. It's a 3-4-3 kind of formation, the preferred formation. And of that front three, there will be a typical number 9. This is a goal scoring, poaching number 9. And at the moment, it is the WE League Golden Boot winner, Riko Ueki, who is occupying that spot. A little bit old, I think it's about 23, 24, so
Mm-hmm.
not exactly a player, but very in form, at least at club level. Up until now at least, she has been the starter in that role. What we've seen in terms of substitutions is Hamano comes on to replace her and plays in that role, which is,
Mm-hmm.
again, a typical number 9. So that maybe we'll continue with that. Maybe Hamano's form at Hammarby will sway the decision, and she might take that position as the starting number 9. Who knows? What I would kind of prefer, on some of the things I've seen from some of the some people online who have kind of looked at Japan quite closely and come up with some really interesting pieces about how she could work in. She could play a slightly different number 9 role, a more deeper kind of false 9, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
because Japan, they do struggle, although they dominate possession and have a lot of creative quality and connect a lot of passes, all that kind of thing. They do struggle to actually break defenses down and score goals. So if we had a false number 9 who would be able to drag defenders out and all that kind of good stuff, Hamano could probably play that role quite well. And from what I understand at Hammarby, she is playing a slightly that is more along the lines of what she's
Yeah.
doing for Hammarby rather than what she does for Japan. So I would like her to be, if there was a type B variant of how Japan are going to play, when they do get into trouble against these defensive setups, it could be Hamano could be the one who could be the catalyst for that
Mm.
variance in
Mm-mm.
formation.
Mm. Yeah, she has been. I mean, obviously she's on loan there, but it would be hard to not see her be as in fact impactful for the World Cup as she's been in Sweden. And I know you mentioned some of the recent camps and looking at the recent results that Japan has been able to go up after against European opposition, non-European opposition. I think they've been one of the few federations that have been really able to mix it up. They've got some pretty good results. I mean, convincing win over Canada, pretty much deadly when they needed to be. Over Portugal as well, very close losses to the US and Denmark. How do you expect them to do in their group and I guess in the World Cup in general?
Sure. All right. So I think the results you've mentioned there, I think She Believes, right? That was a
Hmm.
very good a good kind of reference point as to where the squad or kind of the strengths and deficiency of where Japan is at. So you
Hmm.
mentioned the game against the US. It was a very narrow loss, but Japan dominated.
Yep.
It was a very typical kind of the way that, as I mentioned before, dominate possession, look really good, really fancy, but then a pinpoint counter attack and it's game over and there's no way back. And as the game goes on, the
Yeah.
confidence, young team, right? They don't really do too well there. Yeah, I mean that it's for me that game is very typical of how things go in knockout competition, right? Yeah, very often we see defensive setups win out. So that is what I fear. I think that is this ability to score goals. Yeah, they're very gung ho, but they're not very methodical. Like, would it
Mm-hmm.
hurt them to draw back a little bit and play along the back line, draw some plays, press, and then break the lines? They're going to have to come up with this kind of plan B, like I mentioned before, and that is what I think Ikeda is going to have to come up with for them to go deep. Looking at the tournament and the group, who they're going to come up against, I mean, it's Zambia, Costa Rica,
Mm-hmm.
and then is the third game. So I like the Zambia team because they were at the Tokyo Olympics in
Mm-hmm.
2020. It was played in 2021, of course, and Barbara Banda, the star striker, right? So I think they could probably ask a few questions of Japan defensively. Japan leave a lot of space at the back, as the US well know.
Yep.
So the clean sheet could go, but ultimately there should be enough mistakes in that team for Japan to win that one out. And I'd say something similar with Costa Rica. I think Japan, it's a little bit complacent, but I think Japan could afford to rotate a little bit. So that's where
Mm-hmm.
we might see some youngsters. And then is the kind of interesting fixture of the group is Japan versus Spain as the final fixture, right? So
Mm-hmm.
very good chance that both teams are on 6 points. So what do they do? Do they rotate, or is it advantageous to finish first or second or however? So how I've worked it out and how I've kind of worked my predicted
Right.
tournament, and the couple of the coaches I've spoken with who are coaching professionally in the WE League and what they think the approach would be, it is highly desirable for Japan to avoid Norway because it's paired with Group A. Group C is paired with Group A, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we have to imagine Norway are going to finish top, and then whoever finishes second gets Norway. Norway are a team, Scandinavian, maybe a little bit like Denmark or Sweden. Japan are
Yeah.
not all very well suited to these teams who can, if they're defensive. I know that Norway have had a little bit of a few bad tournaments and a few bad results, right? But say if they've got that sorted and they are kind of very resilient, very organized in defense, that could really pose some problems for Japan. A young side, if it goes past 90 minutes, it could be a very risky game. So they might
Mm-hmm.
want to win out in that Spain game, or at least somehow finish top of the group.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing there is whoever wins that game, the Norway versus Japan or Norway versus Spain, it's probably going to be the US in the quarters.
Ah,
Assuming, yeah,
they
assuming that the US finished top, because
top.
US, you guys have Holland, right? So if you finish top
Mm-hmm.
of that, you go through to Italy, I think, and that's going to be. You'd have to imagine the US will be there in the quarterfinal,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, so that would be with Japan finishing second. So it's highly desirable to finish top, I would say, in
It's
that.
really interesting when you've got like the two big dogs in the same group meeting and at the end because you know there's so much on the line and that's when you really have to like plan out what is your next route. But I think that Spain game, like you mentioned, is interesting, but I feel like it will be kind of like a chess match because both of them love possession. It's almost
Sure.
who's gonna be able to make something out of that possession first and be able to keep a clean sheet. So,
Mm.
assuming they make it to the quarterfinals, I think for Japan, it's important to have a good showing really at the World Cup. Looking at the trajectory of women's football in general in Japan, there's been a few elements that have, I guess, contributed to the decline over the past decade or so. Like given the factors that are going on, the broadcasters now still not able to pin down rights with the World Cup. There's still a lot of stress and worry about what is going to happen, and I think with a team like this, is just it's saddening to see. I guess like what are you hoping this World Cup would achieve about the sport in the nation?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, this topic. It's enough for an
An
episode long.
episode. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. I mean, so a World Cup win in 2011, there was a big boom of women's football. The local league, the high attendances, a lot of interest. The next couple of tournaments, there's a lot of interest, but it's in Japan. It's not just with women's football or football, sport in general.
Mhm.
The Japan team or the Japan representatives, they have to be doing well for it to be popular. And if they're not doing well, then people don't really have interest in that sport. Sadly, it's the reality. So yeah, so the decline, you could say probably the big reason is that they don't have that dominant presence anymore. Although
Mhm.
I would argue that now that we have players, the top leagues of women's football are decorated with Japanese with national
Yeah.
talent. everywhere you look. So yeah, but it doesn't seem to be kind of transferring or filtering through here yet. The interest, just sadly, it hasn't kind of matched the acceleration that we're seeing in Europe and in the States, and of course in Canada now as well.
Mm.
The Wii League games, the attendances are not great. We're talking less than 2,000, or sometimes some are not even getting 1,000 spectators, right? So compared to like the likes of Arsenal in the WSL, it's not a lot, right? So what would kind of really help get back on that trajectory? It would be a good performance at the World Cup. Then what you have to think about is, what is a good performance and what does success look like? What will people interpret success to look like? Ikeda has actually been out and he's kind of tried to manage expectations a little bit as to where Japan are as an international side and how they match up against the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And they're not there. I don't know if for me, I don't really care too much for, the FIFA rankings and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But Japan at the moment, they're ranked 11th. And I think that's about right, kind of just out of the elite, not in the top runnings, but kind of knocking on the door a little bit, always looking capable. And I think that's a good kind of reflection as to where we are. So if I think for me, I mean, probably the masses here in Japan, it'd have to be nothing short of a World Cup win, or at least appearing in the final, or a gallant display against the United States, which will probably be in the quarterfinals, as we've just discussed. That would probably have to be what does it. It would have to be going deep, a long run in the tournament for the media to pick it up and for the media to stay interested. So at minimum, it would have to be the semi-finals for the whole thing to be considered a success. That might, help get things back on track. But yeah, for my realistic expectation, I think the quarterfinals, it would be realistic for where Japan are going to go, looking at the tournament chart and all the rest of it. But yeah, so that is probably it. It would have to be a top performance going deep into the tournament, headline making, big exciting games. Maybe they could eliminate one or two big sides. That would kind of really do some good to get the name going again here, and that would help.
Right.
The course for correction, I suppose.
So I guess I know we're running out of time here, but to kind of maybe pinpoint it, is it just a difference of culture that just in Asia, really football or just sports in general maybe doesn't have that big of a boom like we see in Europe? Or was it just the timing of an investment that they missed? Or was it a window of opportunity that just wasn't jumped on? Or like, I guess I think there's a lot of confusion as to why the decline was so rapid in some aspects.
All right. Okay. So I'll give you three reasons. So the first is the one that I've just mentioned about the word no performances on the international stage. The second is when we launched the professional league, the Wii League, there was right at the time of COVID. So spectators and all this kind of stuff couldn't happen. A lot of profits were kind of going to be lost, right? So the original launch budget was slashed by 70%. They were left with 30% to work with to promote this thing. And even with that, they didn't do it very well. So there's been a lack. It's an organizational standpoint, and that money has not been returned even now that we're kind of coming out of COVID time. So that hasn't helped at all. So they've been left with nothing. The other thing is that the men's league, the J League in Japan, it's a very, this is not to say that women don't go and watch sports in Japan. They absolutely do, and they absolutely have. Compared with other countries, it's quite a high amount go to J League, to men's games, and watch, because it's very safe environments, very friendly. It's a very different kind of show, different kind of spectacle, which does kind of cut across these kind of demographics. It's very family oriented. So you've got a product that's already taking up a lot of the potential audience already, and now what you kind of trying to force something else in, which is kind of up and coming. I believe that the quality is there, but not like everybody else. They want to go to the big spectacle with the J League, 50,000 fans, fireworks, all the rest of it, right? They're probably going to want to go and do that. So that is also the other challenge, which is kind of, it's not a lot we can actually do about that. They've done their job in creating a good, friendly product that many people can enjoy. So it is a bit of a struggle that's going on at the moment there. And as I say, they're going to have to come up with some new, fresh thinking, promotional wise, to kind of get this back on track and really kind of boost the sport, boost the women's game here in Japan, and get it back to where it should be.
I'd be very hopeful for that. And I think media like yourself who promote the team as well as you do, and the league within itself, I think that's exactly what I hope you also start seeing around you. Speaking of which, I'm sure you're going to be hands full. Hopefully Japan have a very deep run, so they keep you even more occupied during the World Cup. But how can people read on your analysis, your breakdowns, a lot of your takes within the team? I know you're going to be the person to go to about Japan and their group.
Oh, too kind. Yeah, okay. So Twitter's probably the best place. I'm usually on Twitter, sometimes Instagram, but you can find me Twitter, which is abishop32. I'll have a few articles out before the World Cup. I will
Mhm.
be in New Zealand for the group stages, I think, and then I will be heading home just after that. Sadly, hopefully Japan will be in the group. So yeah, so stay tuned, and I hope to have some really interesting content out there.
Beautiful. I'll link plenty of your stuff down below. So if anybody's interested, everything's going to be down below. Highly, highly recommend a lot of what Alex covers for the Japanese team. I think a team that has unfortunately gone under the radar for a bit in terms of just that interest is gone from the media and the fans, but certainly a team that doesn't lack any qualities or potential. And I think we need to reinstill that. But Alex, I really appreciate you joining me today. And I hope whatever we spoke about becomes a reality in terms of rejuvenating what is a great football scene in Japan.
Absolutely, I'll be fighting the cause.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So that was all things Japan and the World Cup for you with Alex Bishop. I highly recommend you definitely give him a follow on a lot of his platforms. Really great work, really great detailing about Japanese football in general, and kind of gives you an understanding of what that demand has been looking like over the last few years. Joining Japan in Group C are going to be Spain, as we previously discussed with Alex, Costa Rica, as well as Zambia. Starting off with Spain, I think there are various different elements that we can bring up and talk and discuss about, because it is really, really hard to kind of assess what the Spanish team is going to look like in terms of expectations, in terms of the players that have kind of just dropped back in. Talking a little bit more about those players, I had an entire video reacting to the squad announcement, talking about what it means for some of the players that have joined, the players that have decided to forfeit the World Cup, what conclusions are we supposed to draw from the federation, everything kind of going around that topic in an earlier video, so definitely I recommend you check that one out. I've tried my absolute best to kind of separate what's been happening to what we are expected to see on the pitch, and I really don't think that is a possibility. For one, obviously the quality players that have returned back into the squad, the likes of Alexia Boutet, she's just coming back from an ACL injury. We haven't seen her play, the full amount of minutes. She missed out on the Euros last summer. She hasn't joined the national team, one, because she was out, but two, she was obviously part of the 15 players that stepped away from the national team. Aitana Bonmati is in a very similar boat. We saw her perform week in and week out for Barcelona. Absolutely top tier, so consistent, just never drops below above par level. But once again, we haven't seen her in that squad since the Euros. So it's like, what is the expected role of her? The players that have been called up instead of these players, are they going to be integrated more because they have just been called up to camps recently? Or what is that player role going to look like? Players as a whole, even with those missing, I think Spain still stands out with their roster. I think the stars that they have, from the young ones to the experienced ones to those that have won the Ballon d'Or to those who have been nominated to win the Ballon d'Or, they've got quality from, everywhere on the pitch. You look at the bench even, so deep, so full of quality, so full of just technical abilities that is hard to match from the other nations. What Vilda has struggled to do with them is use that frequency of possession to the frequency of goals. And if you look at the ratio, it's kind of pathetic actually, because they can hold the possession for 70% of the game and just not be able to score a single goal, which again, looking at the ratio, it's not great. So for him, he struggled in the big games and he struggled in kind of the major tournaments to be able to look at the ratio of possession and convert that into goals. It's actually really crazy to think that this is Spain's only third World Cup appearance. Their first one was back in 2015 when Canada hosted, but they haven't been in a semi-final or past in any major tournament. Do they have the stars to win it? Absolutely. Do they have the players to win it? Absolutely. You're talking about a squad that is full of Champions League winners who perform at a top level at their club every single week. Again, I don't think I could look at a squad other than Spain and say, yes, every single player of theirs is kind of in top form shape. But you certainly cannot exclude the element of what's going on in the locker room, what's going on off the pitch, because it all works together. It's not just how they perform on the pitch. Well, they only perform for 90 minutes on the pitch. It's the amount of hours and weeks and training and everything that happens off the pitch than actually translate on the pitch. So again, for Spain, they can absolutely win it. Will I bet money on them that they're going to win it? It's really hard to say. I think you'll have to kind of wait for that first group stages game, purely because we haven't seen the Spain that we will see since maybe the Euros. There's a lot that's happened behind the scenes. There's a lot that has not yet been disclosed. They definitely will make it out of this group. There's no doubt that they will probably even top the group. But it's a topic of what's going to be a distraction, what's not going to be a distraction, and just how the team is going to be able to work around that. The next nation is going to be Costa Rica, who's also making their second World Cup appearance. They missed out in the 2019 in France, but were drawn into their first ever appearance in 2015. They did not make it out of the group stages, which actually quite funny. They drew Spain and had a draw against Spain. They drew with North Korea, which is another interesting one because they've also drawn Japan here, but they ultimately lost to Brazil and just couldn't edge it out of the group. They're one of those nations that are certainly going to enjoy the fact that the World Cup expanded to 32 teams because they clinched their qualification spot when finishing 4th in the CONCACAF. They had a very impressive run in the qualifiers. They won all 4 of their matches. They scored some ridiculous 22 goals, conceded absolutely none. They finished second in the group stages behind Canada. They lost the semifinal to the United States, but that is definitely not an easy run to have to go up against both the United States and Canada. Kind of like what happens in a CONCACAF, but the tournament was in a nutshell quite a successful one because not only did they do really well in the qualifiers, they were able to gain that experience against Canada and against the United States. Now, sure, kind of the United States and Canada are like the top 2 out of the 3 or 4 nations in the CONCACAF that you want to go up against and have that experience. And for them, making sure they qualified for the World Cup, but they were also able to meet 2 of the eventual finalists in the CONCACAF is really, really good experience for them. And I don't think they had bad showings against them at all, actually. Raquel Rodriguez, you certainly have to look at her as one of the stars for Costa Rica. She's only 29, but she's already hit that 100 caps mark for them, over 50 goals as well for her nation. The midfielder also holds a lot of history for Costa Rica because in that draw against Spain in 2015 was Costa Rica's first ever Women's World Cup goal. So not only is she one of the survivors from that World Cup, but she's also the one who scored the nation's first ever World Cup goal. That's just a massive, massive achievement. And for her to be going into a kind of a similar group than what they played in 2015 is going to be very nostalgic for her almost. That's not the only bit of history that they achieved back in 2015 because when they fielded Gloriana Villalobos, I believe that's how you say it, she was only 15 at the time and became the youngest ever player to feature at a senior World Cup. So extremely mature beyond her years, always playing at such a high level, extremely disciplined, very, very talented, full of character. You can see that when she's playing on the pitch. She was on the side that won bronze at the Pan America back in 2019. So it's almost like she's so young, but she's already gotten so much experience. Because of that experience and that maturity and her character, she never cracks under pressure, which is a quality you want to have at a World Cup. And you certainly want to disperse that with your teammates. For them to be able to finish second, because I definitely have Spain finishing first, they need to get a really, really good result against Spain and kind of hope they win against Japan. I feel like they're certainly going to be Zambia, but it's going to be them or Japan. And whoever wins that game, for me, is kind of going to be the one that's going to lock in that second spot. Then moving on to Zambia, also making their first World Cup appearance. Again, another nation that's really cherishing the expanded format of the World Cup. Now, I don't want to be a party pooper, but I definitely don't have very high expectations for them. I've been quite positive with a lot of the nations that are debuting, but I just don't think it's the one for Zambia just yet. For me, they're still way too defensively weak to go up against the nations that they're going to go up against. And another thing has been that they haven't been going after European opposition. And you might say, well, Miriam, that's really weird because they just played Ireland in a 3-2 loss after going up 2-0. Like, what are you talking about? And I would say, well, actually, really good point. But their last European opposition before this Ireland game was back in 2021 when they lost 10-3 to the Netherlands. In your question, Bobby, well, Miriam, why do they need to go up against European nations? And to that, I say, well, you definitely need to mix up your friendlies. Going up against the nations that you already face in your continental competition certainly doesn't cut it in the friendlies. Against European and even CONCACAF nations and South African nations, they do very, very well. Their most impressive win, I would say, was a 1-0 win against Nigeria last year, which is the win that clinched them that third spot and ultimately clinched them a World Cup qualifications. But putting fixtures aside, one, they haven't mixed it up enough for me, and they haven't faced top opposition enough for me in the last run of games to be able to say, yeah, they're going to challenge the likes of Japan or the likes of Costa Rica even, and certainly not Spain. Their captain, Barbara Banda, was a name that you certainly heard back in the Tokyo 2021 because she became the first player to score consecutive hat-tricks in a single Olympics tournament. In fact, she tallied Christine Sinclair's record of 6 goals back in the 2012 Olympics. Now, there's not many players that can have their names in the history books with Christine Sinclair. Barbara Banda can say that she does, and it's in the Olympics, which is the Olympics that Christine Sinclair won gold. Like, the whole storyline is just so nice to look at. And what's so scary, she's only 23. She did that record when she was 20. Their captain, she's such a versatile striker that I will absolutely not be surprised to see European teams go and clinch her super soon. Zambia is not a team that scores often. Certainly, they're not ones that are going to be expected to put on massive score lines, but if there is somebody that is getting really, really close to scoring a goal, it's definitely her. Another one is Kaverine Katongo. She's still only 20, such an impressive midfield, very, very all-rounded, considered one of the best African emerging talents. Her performances in the qualifications led a lot of journalists to kind of compare her playing style with N'Golo Kante's playing style and work from the 2018 World Cup that the men's had. And she's only 20, again, so Zambia certainly have a lot of their stars actually still quite young and still very, very talented and mature for their age. Will this be the competition that they break out and shock some people? I don't think so just yet. I think even if they grab a point, it would be somewhat of a successful campaign. Moving forward, they certainly need to mix up their opposition, and I think looking at their program and structure, it needs a little bit more funding and a little bit more pumping in money, but certainly a country that has done its best with the resources that they have. So for me, I think I will probably have to edge it for Spain and Japan for this group. The 2 previous groups, I wasn't really able to pin down that second spot. For this one though, I think I'll definitely rate Japan to win it over Costa Rica. I want to hear your opinions on this group. What do you think of Japan, Spain, Costa Rica, and Zambia? Let's chat it up. I want to know all your opinions. As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me on YouTube and follow me on Twitter. And I will see you later.